Hey all my fellow and soon-to-be maniacs out there, it is me, the Chainsaw Maniac, your favorite webcomic maker, animator, inspirator, and motivator here to help you with your webcomic. Now today we're going to be talking about how to make backgrounds for your webcomics, but I'm going to be taking you through my process of how I create backgrounds within Blender using grease pencil as well. And the reason why I want to take you through this process is because I found new methods of making your backgrounds look more hand-drawn and stylized as well as painted, so it's gonna have more of a natural feel to your background. Still, it's not really perfect, but you can get as close as you can get, making it more hand-drawn. Depending on how your art style is as well, it can differ on the methods we may use. So if you enjoy the videos and the content that I do, I suggest you head down and like this video as well as hit that subscribe button, because that always helps. And don't forget to hit that notification bell if you want to be notified of every other video that I do. Go ahead in the comment section down below and also let me know any video suggestions you have. But let's go ahead and let me take you through my process. So as you can see, I'm working on a very complex background in the back here on screen. So while I take you through this process, you can see I've been working on this background as well as designing a new method to create backgrounds for my webcomics, because I wanted to give more of a hand-drawn feel to it. So I wanted to make it look more natural, more hand-drawn, or more like painterly in a sense. But I didn't want to make it too painterly. I wanted to just give it a comic book type feel with the fills and maybe a variation in color in different aspects of the shading. So I've created my own little shader node here, and it has variations within the shader node so that it has like little blotches and like variations within the material. So it looks kind of like you went in there and hand painted it yourself. Now, it's not specifically perfect and it's still something I'm looking into and working on, but it does give it more of a painterly 2D feel to it, and that's what I'm kind of going with here. But you're probably asking, why don't you just draw your backgrounds rather than use 3D assets? Now, 3D assets really help speed up the process. So therefore, if I perfect this method, I may not have to draw as much backgrounds as I would have to. Obviously, there's an occasional single shot panel where maybe a background, I don't have to design an entire background for that scene. These 3D modeled backgrounds that I'm doing, the very complex ones, these are for mostly when I have multiple panels to do within the same scene or the same area, as well as from different angles. So we'll also keep the lighting more consistent. You know, there's not going to be a difference in light. So it's not like when you're looking from one angle, it looks like it's daytime, like midday, and then you look from the other angle and it's like, oh, it's afternoon. You know, I don't want it to have that inconsistency. So that's why 3D assets also kind of help with that, as well as it saves you time. You know, of course, when modeling the 3D background and putting in your own assets and doing all the other crazy lighting effects and all the stuff that I do. So obviously it's easier for me because I'm a 3D generalist and I know a lot about Blender. So, you know, I know my way around the software. I know how to move things around, where to go, what to do, what tabs to hit. You know, it's gonna be easier for me. It's kind of like my home. I'm just walking in, grabbing a drink. You know what I mean? For you guys who are still learning Blender, it might take some time for you, but this is for the most of you who kind of have an idea of how Blender can be used, or how to use Blender, so to say. And it's for those who are looking more into it and want to know exactly what you can do with Blender, as well as the power of Blender. You know, especially with the new grease pencil tool, you know, there's a lot of power to it, a lot of potential. And obviously I'm a giant Blender nerd, so I like messing around with all the switches and buttons and figuring out different kind of results and effects that I kind of want for what I'm going for. Also, just a little note, always have a good amount of reference for what you're going for, because I actually, when I was going through this process, one of my friends, shout out to Elias, you know, he pointed out what I'm actually going for with the scene. You gotta have a good reference point so you know exactly where you're headed, because honestly, when I started this process, I kind of had an idea of where I've headed, but it was kind of like blurred, so it kind of skewed the results in like what I wanted. And I took a step back, looked at some references or things that inspired this comic that I'm working on, which is Blade Reapers, and the main inspirations were Devil May Cry, Resident Evil, as well as Constantine from the DC comic. There's many different variations of the Constantine DC comics, so because different artists will work on them, so they have their own little take on it. So kind of have to go through all that and see exactly the desired styles that you want for your comic. But I settled more on a Devil May Cry type of style, because I like that art style and it's the main inspiration for this webcomic. I went back to those type of comics, you know, the gaming assets that they use there and everything. And I kind of combined those art styles to make this art style that I'm currently gonna use. It's not perfectly complete yet, but you know, I'm getting there. I still have to put in the characters to see exactly how the characters will take to these backgrounds. So as we move on, I want to talk about a few other steps that I to make this background look a bit more 2D rather than giving the generic 3D feel. Because what I've seen for most webcomic is that the backgrounds are usually very low res for some reason, or the 3D assets looks too 3D, like it looks 3D, you know what I mean? Like when you look at it, it's like, oh, you can tell that's definitely a 3D asset. And this is the one thing I'm trying to break down, so that I want to make a background like so comically like accurate in terms of its style, that when you look at that background, you're like, did this person really draw this, or is this 3D? You know what I mean? I want to create that type of feel, you know. Now obviously you can tell mine is 3D because I'm working on it in 3D, but I want to see exactly if my audience can actually catch that it's 3D, or if it's going to confuse them. That will be very interesting. And I am working on some shading effects as well to make the shading look a bit more hand-drawn, but that's kind of in the works. So far I found a way in the materials to mess around with the ambient occlusion and kind of shade in parts using a wave texture and kind of make it look like you kind of scribbled the shading in certain areas, but it's still a work in progress and it's not perfect yet, so I really want to nail that down. But for what I have now, it's pretty good. It's pretty decent. It's exactly what I want for my art style. And I think that's like the hardest thing to do, is kind of match your 3D backgrounds with the current art style that you have. And I want to match it so well that it looks like that character fits perfectly into that background. It's a very hard thing to do. And obviously as I go along, you know, I have my friends to back me up and see exactly if they can catch whether or not this background is 3D or not. But also I think maybe I should draw a 2D background out in a specific style that I want, and then try and project that 2D style onto my 3D objects. I think that will be a really good method, and that's the next thing I will be trying. So the next thing I want to talk about is the grease pencil line. Now, if you go into the background, as you can see here, I'm moving around here, you can see the lines look more hand-drawn. As you can see, they have this little tapered edges, as well as I've added a bit of an opacity factor so that you can see it kind of fades in here as if you were using pressure on a pen, right? If you go into your modifiers, first you have to select your line art. You can go into the modifiers, you can see exactly the things I've done. So I've used the line art, I've set the parameters for the line art, and if you guys want to see exactly how I set this up, I suggest you join me on a live stream so I can go in detail into it. But for now, I'm just going to briefly explain exactly how this works. So how the line art works, the line art modifier, so to say, the line art modifier does, it projects the line art onto your 3D objects by using the camera's view. If there's no camera active in the scene, it will not work. You have to have a camera in your scene, and then it will project from where the camera is. I will project the lines on the perspective that you currently have on your camera. I actually wanted to mess around with the focal length, but that I'll do in next time. For now, this is what I have, and we're gonna go back in here. You can see you set your materials, the line, the grease pencil object that you want the line object to project from, and you can also select a collection that you only want the grease pencils to affect. You can select, as you can see, I have a bunch of collections over here. So if you select one of them, obviously the grease pencil, like if I select maybe a file, you'll see that the grease pencil will only like affect the files in the scene or something that relates to the file itself. So you can see that happening over there, but obviously I wanted to affect the whole scene, so that's why I would select, I think it was a room, the material is called room. Also make sure you have good naming conventions for your layers and everything else, because it's going to be a mess, especially if it's going to be a scene as complex as mine over here. We have the crease here. You're messing around with the crease angle can also affect how much of an angle will be affected in certain areas of your objects. And you know, you can go around and mess around. You can flicker things on and off, you know, see exactly what it does. Go ahead and mess around with this, don't worry, you know. So I've set the thickness very low here for the style. I should actually set it to 1, to be honest with you. And that should give it more of a tapered feel. That actually looks much better, to be honest with you, because now it's tapering all the way down to a factor of 1 here. You can see that. As you can see now, it has more of a drawy type of feel. I don't know if draw is a word, but that's a word now that I've invented. As you can see here, and this is a key to adding your line weight to those lines for your line art. I've added a thickness modifier. Now what the thickness modifier does, it adds, obviously, makes your lines thicker, obviously. But what you do here is, you see this little graph over here. This is how you affect the taperedness of the lines, or the exact shape of how you want those lines to be affected. So what you do is you kind of mess around with this and see the desired effect you want. So the more higher this point is, the more thickness it will have. The lower the point is, the less thickness it will have, obviously. So yeah, you just have to select the line and the material that you want to be added onto those line art. And then you can add the opacity modifier to your line art. And obviously you do the same thing. It's the same setting, same thing that you do with your thickness modifier. And basically that adds a little bit of fading here on the edges, obviously depending on how much you want it to fade on the tips or the tapered edges. So that's how I kind of did it, and that will kind of give you an idea of how I did the rest of everything else here in terms of the line art. So that kind of just projects that everywhere. Obviously you're gonna get some really weird effects, I don't know, like double lined effects and stuff like that, but you can always fix that with certain other things. But if your geometry is solid, it will not pick up those effects. You just have to make sure your 3D models are really good and really well constructed. Okay, so I want to talk more about the comic styled material, and I want to hop into that for you guys so you guys can see exactly what I've done here. Now I really want to break it down for you guys. So let's head into the shader editor and we're gonna hop in here, and as you can see, I have added the painted comics material over here. And by the way, some of these assets I will be dropping onto my Patreon. So if you guys follow me on my Patreon, obviously you get some of these assets. You get some of the... as a matter of fact, I might just upload this whole scene to my Patreon, to be honest with you. You can get all the assets and all the shaders and everything. And you can mess around with that and see exactly what I did. And you can break down everything within the scene. So yeah, that's a little plus to jumping onto my Patreon. So... now you can see there's a lot of nodes here, but you can see I tried to keep it as simple as possible. I didn't want to overload this thing with a bunch of nodes and then it will slow down my blender like by 100 times. You know, you want to keep things optimized and consistent. And all these nodes are just basically the textures or the painted textures that I've added to this material as well. So if we go back here, yeah, that's kind of how I set it up. So the ambient occlusion is responsible for this little dark area over here, for making it more darker in certain areas. Like you can see it here on the couch. If you go to the couch and we hop into the ambient occlusion, you can see certain areas of the couch are much darker on these areas over here. So it gives it more of that kind of like a painted type of feel in terms of comic books, you know, in terms of its shading and everything. Now obviously you can mess around with that if you really want to. Like over here you can see it better now if you select the color ramp, so you can see the real darks areas that the shading is gonna affect obviously within the scene, and that gives it more of a comic feel, at least from my standpoint, at least the style that I want to see within my comics, you know. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what exactly is going on in the scene. That background is, by the way, just a texture. It's just some weird HDRI texture that just makes it look like I'm in a city, and I like that. Love that so much. I'm going to use that a lot for my comics. So as you can see, the lights are just being as you can see, the lights in the scene are just 3D lights. So that's the cool thing as well. Like in terms of lighting up your scene, you can make sure that the lighting is accurate with just dropping a few objects in your scene. And as you can see here, this is actually one of my favorite parts of the scene. This little desk over here with a cup and everything, and looks really cool. We can see the crease pencil lines are going straight through over here because I'm moving my view around. But yeah, and as you can see here, you can get a good look at this painterly type of texture for this chair. It looks like it's kind of eroding, some sort of weird wooden texture. You can see on the lamp as well, you can see some sort of painterly type thing going on here. Even here on the desk, you know, kind of like light painting like you would do with a kind of brush in Photoshop or Clip Studio, you know. And that's kind of the effect I'm going for over here. So hopefully this gives you an idea of my process and what I've been doing and what I've been going through. There's a lot of trial and error, a lot of things that I'm trying to do. I want to make a webcomic process that's not just easier for me, but easier for every other webcomic artist out there, so that I can just grab it, you know, toss it in there, and it just gives them a chance to tell their story without being too whittled down with everything art-wise, you know what I mean? So like someone with a very basic comprehension of Blender and maybe basic drawing skills can kind of get started and really build on their artistic journey. Now, I'm not saying not learning your fundamentals and just leaning on 3D assets. That is not a good thing to do, because it will really hurt you in the long run. This is just to help those who already have the fundamentals and already have a drawing background, to really help optimize their workflow and make things easy on them so that they can produce more awesome content for us. Okay, so before I end this video, if you guys haven't checked out my webcomic, The City of Clones, yet, it is a webcomic entirely made in Blender. And by entirely made in Blender, I mean I've only used Blender for it. So it's a very awesome project that I put together, and a very comprehensive project in the sense that you can kind of break it down and see exactly how I did certain things. And that's what we're going to do in our Blender walkthroughs with this webcomic process every Wednesday. At least I'm going to try to make it every Wednesday. Like this Wednesday, I didn't have time to really put out a video because, you know, I took my wife out. We had a little date session, you know, a little chill time for ourselves, because that's really important. You know, you don't want to get boggled down too much with work that you forget the most important people in your life, and you really want to spend time with your family. It was a really nice time to kind of step away from all the craziness of the work and everything, you know, and just rest for a bit before heading back into the battlefield. So I really enjoyed it, and obviously there's more of those to come. So if I don't post a video or a live stream, just know that I'm taking time off to relax and chill a bit before heading right back into the fray of things. But as always, every Saturday night we do have at least a 5-hour live stream. So if you guys have any questions and anything, and you just enjoy sitting down with me, you can go ahead and join me on there. We always have great fun on there, and we always do some crazy stuff in terms of Blender and art stuff. So yeah, so all my social links and links to my webcomics will be down in the description down below, as well as my Patreon for any other bonus content you are willing to pay for, because obviously it goes up to $4 I think now for the biggest tier right now, which isn't actually that much since you're getting like free Blender assets and everything. But yeah, I don't want to make it too much, because I want you guys to kind of learn rather than just pay, you know. But obviously it helps me, you know, with my equipment and everything, so I appreciate that. But I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye everyone.